Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this morning's Morning Five. We're in Luke chapter 21. We're going to be jumping in verse 10 in just a moment. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Let's get into the Word of God for a few minutes. Noah?
All right, Luke chapter 21, we're going to start in verse 10. Then he continued saying to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you, delivering you to the synagogues and prisons, bringing you before kings and governors for my name's sake. It will result in an opportunity for your testimony. So set in your hearts not to prepare beforehand to defend yourselves, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom which none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute. But you will be betrayed even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death, and you will be hated by all because of my name. Yet not a hair of your head will perish. By your perseverance you will gain your lives. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is at hand. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those who are in the midst of the city must leave, and those who are in the countryside must not enter the city, because these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath against this people, and they will fall by the edge of the sword, and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And there will be signs in sun and moon and stars, and on the earth, and anguish among nations, in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves, men fainting from fear and the expectation of the things which are coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But when these things begin to take place, straighten up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near."
There's a lot here. This is a really complex text, and it's one of these texts that is so fascinating, and it lends itself to some fascinating conclusions that sometimes aren't warranted by the text. A lot of times people look at this text and they see the end times and what's going to happen. We need to understand that the text is telling us what will happen to Jerusalem. All right, Jerusalem fell in 70 AD because the Romans came in and destroyed it. But the Romans came in and destroyed it because this was God's judgment against Jerusalem. So we have to understand within the context that we're dealing with something very specific, and that is the fall of Jerusalem, which we then say, well, that really has no bearing on our life today. But I think there are some things that you and I can take from this. First of all, that God is a God who judges nations, and that God brings his judgment down upon nations whenever he believes it's time. And what drives this persecution, and what we need to think about is maybe what can happen to us today or at some point in the future, is what drives this judgment is the persecution on his people. All right, if you notice throughout the text, in verse 17, they persecute you. They will hand you over to the synagogues and prisons. You'll be brought before the kings and governors. You'll be betrayed. So when nations are ungodly and they persecute God's people, they may be subject to God's wrath at some point in the future. I guess the thing I take from this, and I think we can find application in all of this, is we need to understand that people and ungodly people will turn against us. This is the way things have always been. But God is not ignorant of what's happening, and God is not uncaring, and God will take care of us at some point. God will bring judgment. There are two admonitions that I think you and I need to hold on to here. Admonition number 1, verse 19, by your endurance, gain your lives. When persecutions come our way in life, from our culture, from those around us, the main thing we need to think about is we've got to endure it. God will reward us one day. God will defend us one day. Maybe a nation will fall, maybe it won't. Maybe a culture will fall. Maybe we will die and find ourselves in heaven. But what we need to do in those times of difficulty is we've got to endure. We've got to press on and hold on to God, which brings us to the second admonition, which is kind of still the first admonition. But verse 28, but when these things begin to take place, stand up and lift your heads because your redemption is near. That idea of standing up and lifting your head is the idea of resolution. Be resolved. Why? Because God will deliver the faithful one day. Maybe in some ways this does stand as a shadow of what will happen in the end. Okay. Immediately, it's the fall of Jerusalem. Are there situations in our lives where we will be persecuted? Yes. Is there a time coming in the end where God will end all things and set up a new order? Yes. What you and I need to do as Christians is make sure that we are resolved to follow the Lord, and we endure whatever comes our way, regardless.
Yeah.
Noah?
Yeah, I just hear this text screaming at me not to put my faith in anything other than God.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, I think back to Habakkuk, Daniel, forward to the book of Revelation. It's all this same message of whatever the earthly nation is, whether they think that they're righteous or not, they're gonna fall.
Yeah.
And God raises up kings and deposes kings, and that's the way it is. And by trusting in anyone other than him, we're just kind of failing to, see what he's laid out for us here, that there is an end goal and that he's going to bring that about.
Yeah, yeah. So just a challenging text, but ultimately just one that encourages me, you, to be faithful, to endure. Hope that helps you today in your walk with the Lord. If you've got any questions, comments, you want to throw them on Facebook, YouTube, we'd be happy to see those. Thanks a lot. God bless. Have a great